Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Leadership Through Crisis, Adapt. I'm Jeff Scott, CEO of Section 810 Communications, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back for those of you that have been participating in this series, or those of you that are here for the first time today. In just a moment, I'll be introducing our guest who I'm delighted to have join us today, but a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. For those of you that are new, these webinars have been going out to people all around the world, and we have different time zones, typically large audiences, so everyone's line is on mute. However, we do want to give you the opportunity to interact with us through the session. So you'll notice in your control panel that you do have the ability to chat or ask questions of the staff. Feel free to use that questions area to type in your questions throughout the presentation. At the conclusion, we're going to be taking a look at those questions and looking at them and reading them aloud and giving answers for the entire audience. We definitely want this to be an interactive session and give you an opportunity to engage with both Mike D'Addio and myself. Section 810 Communications, we focus on training in the area of soft skills, communication, leadership, sales, public speaking. If you want to get some information on what our firm does, there is a handout available to you in the control panel. And today is one in a series of free webinars we're doing through the month of April and into May to help people learn how to enhance their leadership and communication skills during this work from home environment. So just so I can make sure that everyone sees the welcome slide and you can hear my voice clearly, you'll also notice in your control panel an icon in the form of a hand. Go ahead and click that. Raise your hand if you can hear my voice clearly and see the welcome screen, because it's nothing worse than doing a webinar and no one can hear you. Perfect. I see all the hands going up, so we are good. So at this point, I am really privileged as Mike and I pull our cameras up on screen to say hi. I'm absolutely delighted to have Mike D'Addio join our session today. Mike not only is a senior executive in the hedge fund and alternative investment space, he's also chairman of the advisory board at LeverData. He's a frequent panelist with Milken and industry events. And I've had the personal privilege of working with Mike for a number of years. So I've seen his leadership firsthand. Mike, I'm really excited to have you join us today. Thank you for being here. I think you're on mute, Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for having me. Happy to join and join the series.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been enjoyable. We're getting some great feedback, and I know a number of people are excited to have you personally join us today. So when we talked about this, what did we want to go over, and how do we want to talk about leadership? There are lots of webinars and articles going on right now about communication in this new remote work environment, leadership. You've had experience in a number of different areas, and we talked about what everyone's seeing on screen right now, a couple of different areas to bracket all these areas together. We talk about why adapt in general, the new normal. How do you balance out keeping corporate objectives along with the personal aspect, all these different elements. So today, what I really wanted to do is let the audience join us as we have a cup of coffee and really talk about some of these areas that I know you have so much experience in. And one of the first things is adaptation. Why? Why do people need to adapt, and what's really happening in this world of change?
Great, thanks, Jeff. And let me just start with a little thought exercise here. If you close your eyes for a second and think of a world where 2-3 weeks prior, things were normal. You got up every day and you tried to make it to the gym, you tried to get your kids to school, you tried to make it work on time, you worried if there was traffic, all the normal things you would do. And then something happens. And you roll the clock forward a few weeks and everything's changed. Everything that was normal to you has changed. Let's say you go to work in a big city like New York City. You walk around, the streets are empty. The people that are out or are tentative, they're concerned. Everyone's looking in different directions. The tenor, the energy, it's all different. And you go home at the end of the day and you look outside and you wonder, how did this happen? What happened? When will it go back to normal? What's normal? Those are some of the things we'll talk about today. But I've done that. several times over life. And the experience I just talked to you about was somewhere around November 2001, which was after September 11th. It's not what I experienced, let's say, the other day, because that experience has happened to me several times. And so the message here, as you reopen your eyes and think about it, is we seem to be having once in a lifetime kind of black swan events about every 10 years. And while the cause of them is always different, it's always different. You can't really predict the cause. The output, the impact is our normal changes dramatically, rapidly, faster than you can even consider it. And we, as people, as leaders, have to take time to figure it out with imperfect information, and that's the big one. Information is going to be imperfect. It is going to change rapidly. And we have to think really hard about, as leaders in any way, even leaders at home for your family, how do you react to this massive change to the normal, and then be able to gain the perspective necessary to try and react to it in thoughtful ways with imperfect information. And that's the perspective I'd like to paint here, right? Which is normal what's not normal becomes normal very quickly. And that's all about the adaptability of the human spirit. If there's one thing I think as human beings we're best at, politics probably isn't one of them, adaptability and changing is. And so if you would just think to yourself again about where you are right now and think back to February, let's call it 10th or something, before all of this really hit hard here, and think what you were doing on February 10th. I happened to be skiing with my kids. And if someone had skied up to me on the ski lift and came to me and said, I can tell the future, in 9 weeks, you will have pretty much only seen in person your closest family. You will not have been out to a restaurant or flown or driven anywhere more than a mile from your house. And you will all be on lockdown and with no end in sight. I would have asked them to please check into the closest loony bin possible, because there's no chance that would happen. And look where we are now. And look at how we've adapted. And we'll talk about that some more.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. And Jeff, please feel free to jump in at any time. In between 9/11 and here, we've had the great financial crisis, which was a very different, but similarly shockingly scary time. We didn't have worries about people walking around on the street. The streets weren't empty, but certainly a lot of the commercial real estate and a lot of businesses were emptied because of what it did to our finance and financial situation in our economy. So it almost is, at least since I've been out of school, every 10 or so years, something big happens. And if we roll back the clock to 87, we had the big stock market crash. I was in college and didn't really experience that one that much, thank God. But it does seem to happen. So keep in mind, this likely will be not your last one.
Mm-hmm.
There will be another one. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it'll be, but we'll each get at least one more of these in our lifetime. So what we learn here and what we think about here is going to be really important.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny too, Mike, when we look at leadership, and we know some similar leaders, then we have different circles as well. And one of the things I've seen is that some leaders and some organizations have adapted really easily and quickly. They had a culture that allowed more of that distributed workforce, that I'll call it a trust factor, because in some cases it is trust, but that ability to say we can work remotely. Other companies I know have really struggled with this, and that struggle almost always starts at that leadership level. I know companies, they had what they would call, or what I call the plumber principle. In other words, you want to work from home? Yeah, if the plumber's going to come over at 2 o'clock, you can spend the afternoon work from home. But if the plumber principle doesn't apply, no, we want you in the office. And all of a sudden, those leaders have been thrust into this new world of saying, oh my gosh, I've got to trust that my people are actually not binge watching Judge Judy or Friends, but they're actually getting their jobs done, and we're still focusing that way.
And that's a great segue. And I was actually going to go with and what I would say is you bifurcate very quickly into knowledge-based roles and the non-knowledge-based roles. Now, I think we've seen amazing adaptability and innovation in the non-knowledge-based roles. We'll get to that, but let's talk about this one first. Absolutely the case that the vast majority of firms that can work remotely, that can have a significant portion of their workforce not have to be at their desk in some common office have had that capability in theory and in practice, technology-wise, for at least 5 years. I mean, we're all doing it. Everyone's at home getting work done. The technology has existed. It's not been perfect, mostly because we didn't know how to use it, but people have learned. Some firms are just used to it and it's become ubiquitous, like video conferencing is just the way you do meetings. And when you have a conference on a phone call, I had a conference yesterday for another startup I work with, and it was a phone call conference. And I was like, what are we in the 80s? Why are we, who set up a phone call conference? And everyone's like, oh, he did it. Yeah, this is stupid, right? Next time it'll be Zoom or WebEx or BlueJeans, right? But when you look at the knowledge economy, we've had this ability to do it for a long time. As you said, Jeff, many firms have, they've gotten over the plumber principle, but even more have it. And it comes from the top and it comes from leadership. I'll give you, I sort of like to say, and I've heard this probably in a dozen conversations I've had over the last several weeks, all from right here, right? Usually not as well dressed. I did put on a button-down shirt for this for Jeff today. Usually I'm in my Michigan shirt and my Michigan hat. So what you find is, and I coined this term with a friend of mine a couple days ago, many of the dinosaurs have finally died. And what do I mean by that? Usually it's somebody who has as much gray hair as Jeff, maybe something between me and you, who just don't have the view that you can work from home effectively, right? And they want you in their seat. And I can give you multiple examples. I wouldn't name names of people who, it's just the way they run their firm, and that's the way they want to run their firm. And it doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just culturally unacceptable at that point. So I was speaking to a good friend. He works at a broker dealer, at a boutique broker dealer, and the head of the firm is one of those dinosaurs, not much older than us. And he's like, unless you're in your seat, you're not working. And unless I can look out of my office and see you, or if you're in a seat somewhere in my London office, you're not working. And never did a video conference, anything like that. Now they call him the Zoom junkie. Okay. All of a sudden, he's like, this is great. I can do this. I can have one Zoom and I can flip into my other one. And he's got 2 different accounts going. And he goes, he said it's like night and day. So the dinosaurs have died, the vast majority, because what have we learned in the knowledge economy? We have learned you can. People are efficient, effective. I sort of do this. I look at it as like the first couple of weeks, even for firms that are used to working remotely or are very distributed, it was a shock to the system because they weren't used to everyone being remote, okay? So it probably took 2 weeks for people to say, okay, I've figured out my rhythm, I've figured out what I do. And then you get to the 3rd week and you start getting back to work and like things settle in a little bit. You got your phone set up. As Jeff and I were talking, Jeff turned around his desk so he has a nice, it's not his kitchen you're looking at, but it's a nice setup. I've got my little back screen here, and you figure it out. So in the 3rd week, everyone's like, okay, I sort of got to figure it out for those who can. And then I'm going to plagiarize this term from Jen Prozac, who I spoke to the other day. I think we might have some folks from her firm on, and I did tell her I would plagiarize this, and she agreed. And then in the 4th week, I saw it. I think we all saw it. We got this pivot to productivity. In the 4th week, those of us who can work from home efficiently got back to work, and it started working well. And the world opened up, and the phone started ringing, and the email started going, and the sales meetings started happening, and the demos, and anything in which you work, we got the pivot to productivity back in the 4th week in the knowledge economy.
I would agree with that, Mike. In fact, I know some people on the line today were part of the first in this series, which was done a few weeks back, and it was best practices on working from home. And we had several industry, business, HR leaders that were part of that panel discussion. And we talked about, again, how do we become productive? Are we coming back to the office? How's that really going to work? And by the way, it's actually a very light shade of blonde. My camera may be giving you a distorted view of that, but it's really fair blonde. But just one of the things I do want to do is do a quick poll with the audience, because as we talk about this new normal and working from home, I've heard different people talk about how it's affecting them, positively or negatively. So what I'm going to do right now is pull up a poll on the screen for everybody to take a look at. And the question that we want you to answer is to rate your productivity while working from home. What we want to do, and this is really just for Mike and me to see, are you definitely more productive when you're at home? Is it about the same? No big deal whether you're in the office or not. or are you less productive at home? So let's just leave this up here for a few seconds, Mike, and let's get an idea of how this new normal, especially in this remote environment, is impacting productivity from our personal perspective. Again, leave it up there just for a couple of seconds. How do you feel about your own productivity? Are you definitely more productive? Are you about the same, or are you less productive? So interesting results. Okay, we'll go ahead and shut that down right now. So 38 and 62. So we've got about 38% of you said that you're feeling definitely more productive. It's better than being in the office. 62 said it's about the same, no real difference in what you're getting done or how you're feeling about that. Absolutely zero people said it's less productive at home. So when you talk about the dinosaur syndrome and leaders that think that what worked in the 70s, the 80s and 90s, even the 2000s is exactly going to work in the 2020s, not the case. And we're seeing it from the results. So thank you everybody for participating in that. We'll come back with another one in a bit.
So I think it is absolutely the exact point is that zero people said they were less productive. Okay, now we'll talk about different types of challenges when people work from home a little bit later. But the fact that 0% said they weren't, I would be interested at some point because I would think would find a big correlation for those who said more productive compared correlated to how long their commute is, right? Because if you have an hour and a half commute every day and you waste 3 hours a day commuting, you're going to be more productive. I was on the phone with a friend of mine the other day. He works at a financial firm. He said, so I used to get up at 4:30, get my workout in, get on the train at 7, be at the office at 8:15. He says, now I get up at 7. I'm done working out at 7:45 because I can't go to the gym, so I do it at my house, and I'm at my desk at 8. Well, that saves me actually more than 2 hours, 3 hours a day, and then we're not even talking about the way home. I am so much more productive because I don't have this long commute. And I think so many people, so let's talk about a few other anecdotes because I've spoken to a lot of people over the last several weeks on a lot of different topics, working with several startups. And I was talking to the head of a very large quantitative trading firm who is sitting at his house with his children and his wife outside of New York City, and they have a nice place and they have a backyard. And I said, how's it going? He goes, the first couple of weeks was a little weird. He said, but I have to tell you, right now, I get everything done I need to get done. We figured it out. Things are working again. I don't lose sleep over at night over, something blowing up on us because we're not ready for this. And I wasn't sure we were ready. And he said, and I've had this many dinners with my kids in a row in as long as I can remember, maybe ever. So there are silver linings in this, right? In terms of the time for those of us lucky enough to work in the knowledge economy and be able to work from home, to be able to do things and connect in ways we hadn't connected before. I think what this takes you to, though, is very much on this slide we say, is it remote work an ally or an enemy? Well, let's think about cultural norms in general that will possibly shatter forever, right? Cultural norms exist for a long time, and we forget why. This is an amazing one. I'll ask Jeff this because he's the only one who can talk. Do you know why the Western world handshakes? Because in Japan, you bow, right? In Thailand, it's more of a, why do we shake hands in the West?
Do you know? Good question. I know there's a book, Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, about the different cultural way of greetings. I don't know the answer though, Mike.
So best I've ever seen, it's because in the West, started in Europe, everybody used their sword right-handed, and you can't draw your sword if you shake with your right hand.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, is that true or not? I don't know. Who cares? Maybe it's partially true. Some of these things you'll never know. But think about that for a second. A cultural norm comes back to history that we have all forgotten, right? So we shake hands for reasons just because we do. None of us know why, but it's our cultural norm. That norm may be shattered. We may have shattered that norm. Right before this all happened, I was meeting with a friend, had a coffee, and instead of even fist bumping, there was the foot bump. And you sit there and that sounds funny, but if you think about transmission of a contact type disease by hands touching your face, we may never shake hands again in Western culture. We probably won't. And that's okay. It's just cultural norms tend to change when big events happen. So taking that as an example, what's going to happen at your office, at your home? Distance learning, Will anybody really go back to working 5 days a week and traveling? I'll give you another anecdote. I was talking to a friend who works at a 20-person hedge fund, small boutique shop. They all started working remotely like March. Their commercial office lease expired at the end of April. And they're like, you know something? We're not going to renew it. We're just going to clear out our stuff one day with some movers, put it in a storage facility, and we'll figure out January 1st what we want to do. Because guess what? This is working pretty well. Right, we're up on Zoom with 20 people on almost pretty much all day. Honestly, it's almost less place to hide because we're all working on one just common Zoom, and people even know when you go to the bathroom, so it's because you're empty on your little spot. And it's actually pretty effective. So we're not even going to renew the lease. We'll save our 40 grand a month and not do anything.
Yeah, it's interesting, right, to look at that, and I can completely relate with the whole productivity side. I've spent a good portion of my career working from home, and then I've had other opportunities where I was office based. And I remember a number of years ago, I was living down at the Jersey Shore, still love the Jersey Shore, and I was working in a firm where our office was in Midtown Manhattan. And I had a 4-hour daily commute. It's 2 hours door to door in, 2 hours door to door home. I also have a large family. I have 9 kids, as you know. So when I got home at 8 o'clock or 8:30 every night.
Makes me shiver, but yeah, I know.
So it's just like 2 times 4, but you lose your
Plus
sanity
1.
a little bit quicker. But yeah, but at the end of it, yes, you lose your math skills also. But at the end of the day, I found that when I could work from home, and you're right, have a lunch with one of my kids, look at their homework assignment, go see something at school when schools actually did exist live and in person. That made a big difference. And having management, having leaders, because we're talking about this leadership aspect, when I had leaders who would say, listen, we want you to do this, I was always more productive and I cared more. I wanted to do that because I felt like my manager was actually looking at me as an individual and not just a cog in a wheel. And there's a definite element of that comes into play.
So I wanted to do one more thing here and say, when we say working from home, right, that's a term that we all understand. The question we should ask ourselves, thinking a little bit bigger picture, is, does that term even have any meaning anymore? If I said I'm working from the 3rd floor or the 4th floor of our office building, that doesn't make any sense, right? If I'm at the office and I'm working from the 3rd floor, if I told you, hey, I'm working from the 3rd floor, you'd probably say, go back to that same loony bin. Why are you telling me that? That's meaningless. I think we're going to find that working from home is going to become almost as meaningless pretty soon, because I think it will become, personally, and what I've heard from others, it's going to become the new normal, right? I think it will be, for those in this kind of knowledge economy, will be very much working from home will be just like working from the office, and it will become part of your normal week. I have another anecdote from a big insurance company, a friend of mine who is the COO of the big insurance company, and they're pretty much about to make the decision. Nobody who's not essential physical presence, which is very few people, are going to be going back to the actual office working until January 1st, 2021. We're just going to let this all play out, see what happens in the fall, and we're just going to plan for everyone to be at home now until January 2021 and figure it out from there as well. And that's a very big firm with thousands of employees, and they're like, this is working. So when you look at that backdrop, do you think as a leader at your firm that it will ever get back anytime soon to 5 days in the office? Think about it this way as well. If everybody works, or half your firm works from home half the time, you never actually need it to be a BCP or disaster recovery plan. It's just normal. A big part of those first 2 weeks was people going, oh my God, when's the last time I tested? Do I have enough Zoom connections? Do I have enough accounts? Do I have enough Citrix connections to get into my infrastructure? If you're doing this regularly and it's just part of your business, you never worry about it. And I suspect that this new normal that we see will overcome the cultural inertia that exists, like the dinosaurs that have died. People will understand it actually does work, and in some ways it's even more effective. And people will find out that there is now a mix, and the idea of working from home is just working from a different location. And then whether that location is a business location or your home office or wherever, it's not going to matter so much. If you think about it in one way, let me just finish the thought. If you think about it in one way, this has probably leapfrogged our cultural acceptance of working from anywhere, given the technology that exists, by a decade, if not more.
I would agree. And what I was going to say is I think we're going to see more companies taking more of a hybrid approach. where it's not an all or nothing campaign. Like you said, the commercial real estate industry is going to be changed dramatically because of, like your friend at the insurance firm, where they're saying we're not going to renew the lease, or we're going to wait until January. I think there are going to be companies that will say, well, you know what, go to that model that you said, 2-3 days maybe you're in the office, or it's optional, and now you can rotate people through hotel stations at your office space and not have that overhead at the same level it was before, but still give opportunities for face-to-face where it's more of an important factor to do that.
That's right. And I think, like, it's just, if you look at even Congress, right, where it was definitely never have a vote remotely. Well, that's going to change, right?
Mhm.
I think I read somewhere 2 days ago in New York City, at least the 5 boroughs, you can now get married over Zoom officially, right? Marriages can now happen. I don't know if divorces can happen that way too. We'll see, right? But all of these sacred cows that had no reason not to move to something that could be done virtually are being slaughtered. And that's a good thing for humanity. And I'll give you the last one that I truly think is going to happen, because both my children, who are in 7th and 9th grade, are distance learning. One of the schools is doing better than the other in terms of getting used to it. But if you think about it going forward, okay, children will eventually go back to school. But what happens if your child's sick and you don't want them to miss school? Why isn't there always a Zoom open for any class? And if your child just even a little sick, you don't want to have to make that choice between going to school and getting the other kids sick and missing school. So they just are able to take all their classes remotely that day. And it completely changes the dynamic of school, and it completely changes the dynamic of communicable diseases, because the kid just stays home, but they don't miss out. They don't get that absent mark. If they're well enough to school, but not well enough not to possibly infect other kids, we now have an option because they've all figured it out.
Yeah.
Massive change to education. I
Yeah,
wouldn't
I
even talk about if
completely
Ivy Leagues continue to exist, because if you don't have to go to an Ivy League to get an Ivy League degree, which we're learning you actually don't, it's going to be very interesting for the higher education system, but that's for a different
I
conversation.
completely agree. And I've got one of my daughters is a 5th grade teacher in New Jersey. And so we've talked about how to use Zoom effectively, not only for academic learning, but also for social outlets, for some of the other artistic different areas that was kind of normal back in the day when the kids were in the classroom. How do you do that now? And how do you embrace that? So we've had some very interesting conversations about how to effectively be a good educator in this new world. But we could take a whole session on that.
So as we, and there's also liability issues and privacy issues that are popping up, that law and policy will now be made for, which will make this all easier going forward, because we've had no choice. So I do want to just leave people, like, back to the leadership angle. Think hard, and in your leadership positions in whatever firm you work in, and realize normal will be very different. Actually, and this is the thing that I think people miss, normal can be better. This will pass, okay? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But normal can actually be better. What have we learned here that is going to allow us to make normal better? What have we learned here that is going to allow us to make our employees more connected to the firm, because we give them more flexibility? They have better work-life experience, even if they work as much, if not more, right? They still are productive, if not 38% more productive, yet their quality of life is better. Right. That is the kind of thing that keeps people very engaged with the firm, because it's about the whole package. So I think we should all look at, and I'll sort of quote this from many sources, and if you read several political books, including the Obama one, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? In a crisis, right, they are typically horrifying and scary, but as leaders, we need to step back, see the context, and say, what do I learn? How do I make value out of this? What are the positives I can draw from this? And let me prepare for what's coming, because whatever the new normal is, it's not what the old normal was. And in some ways it can be better. But even after 9/11, right, the new normal was different. There was more security. There were planters everywhere around the big buildings, so cars couldn't get there. Humanity learns, we adapt. It's one of our things. Someone once said, if you look at humanity on the planet Earth, what's the virus, us or the virus, right? It's a game of adaptation. Can we adapt faster than something that's threatening us? And we're good at it. So the post 9/11, normal was different. It still is. We've just gotten used to it, and now it is normal. And in some ways, it's safer, it's better. After the great financial crisis, I will tell you this, talking and listening to several different credit analysts and what have you, we would be in a world of worse hurt. We would have a financial crisis right now on top of the crisis we have if 2008, 7 and 8 didn't happen, if the feds around the world did not have these tools. If you think back to then, for those of us old enough, it took the Fed and the ECB, the European Bank, weeks to figure out bond buying programs and actually how to do it logistically. These are now tools in their toolbox, and they deployed them in record time because they had them already. They didn't have to develop the tools. So think about it like that. Take a page out of the Federal Reserves around the world. What tools are you developing now to address this crisis that should be honed and used for future crises? Because who knows what the next one will be and when it will be, but it will have similar effects. Normal will go away. There will be lack of information, and we will need to adapt. So think about that very much. What tools can we get out of this that are going to be useful going forward?
I agree, and that's the whole concept of adapting. I mean, I've heard that someone say that normal is really just a setting on a clothes dryer. It really doesn't mean anything. What is normal? It's really what's best. What is the thing that we're doing that's most effective? And from my perspective, the leaders that are up in front of that and running to adapt more quickly, those are the ones that are more successful rather than waiting. And it's a game of trying to balance out and take calculated risks. And where do I go? What's the best for the culture of this firm and for the people? You and I talked the other day about the whole concept, and you know this as a leader leading large firms. Understanding your people is a big part of this, and making sure it's not one size fits all. One employee may be at home where they have no other family and they're completely fine because they're introverted and they like being alone. And then you've got someone else who has a newborn or young kids or a large extended family, and that's a completely different world, especially when you're leading teams that are diverse like that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jeff. It ups the bar. I mean, you need to understand your employees, and to have a good firm and a good culture, you need to understand your employees and each of their individual situations. This just ups the bar, right? I mean, if you are to have somebody with a nice home and they're empty nesters and they each have their own office, you can probably be in that 30% more productive at home kind of land, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are a younger couple with a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old both trying to distance learn, and you're both trying to work in a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, that can be more challenging, right? And it's going to take more effort and work to try and figure that out because your normal support system has sort of disappeared to a large extent. So you have more family time, but you also have a challenge during the day of trying to figure out how you're managing that whole dynamic, right? So, and there's everything in between. And I think, as you look at firms with big diverse cultures and diversity of demographic in your employees, you really have to work really hard to understand that and craft the flexibility around it to work. Because, I have 2 friends, both working in their early 40s, 2 little kids, 2-bedroom apartment. So they have to sort of manage their daily work routines so that someone's close to the kids, which they can be more interrupted, make sure they take lunch to give the kids lunch, and work around that because the kids are younger and they need more time. So I think it really ups the bar. You need to differentiate, you need to understand which people are in which situations so you can tailor them getting to at least being as productive as before, but it might just be in a slightly different way. And that is really where I think lasting value and connection between a firm and its employees can happen if people are willing to be flexible during these times and understand employees' personal situations.
Yeah, I agree. Last week we had the session on enhancing remote communication skills, where I had Michael Peltz as the guest with me. And one of the things we talked about is the difference when you were working in an office versus working from home when it comes to this topic of having family. When we're all in an office, if a meeting runs an extra 15, 20 minutes, it's typically not as major a shift. But when people are home and the lines are blurred and your home life is your work life in a lot of ways, and someone may have, as an example, like your friend with younger kids, that extra 20 minutes may go right in and have a major rippling effect in the home life with the kids' school, with meals, with changing diapers, whatever it might be, versus at work where we have a little bit more of a sterile clinical environment. So it is a bit different that way.
That's right.
So I know we've got some questions coming in too. So maybe in about 5 or 10 minutes, again, to the audience, 2 things. Number one, keep putting in your questions. We'll be taking a look at those in about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll take a look at some of those questions, new live Q&A. This is your opportunity. Ask one of the experts here. Mike's got tremendous leadership experience. So ask your questions to us. The second thing is, as a reminder, for those of you that joined a little bit later, you can learn more about Section 810 communications in the handouts. There's a brochure you can download. And if you missed any of the previous sessions, this is number 4 in a series right now that will end up having 6 different webinars. All of the sessions have been recorded. They're on Section 810 Communications YouTube channel, so feel free to go back and review any of those other discussions and webinars if you'd like to. So I think, Mike, we've already talked a lot about some of the changes going on with industry and how it's going to impact different sectors.
So I exactly, and I think here for everyone on the phone, start to think through scenarios, right? I think the scenario that everything's great and the world opens up in a step function is impossible. I just don't think, unless something amazing comes out and a cure materializes tomorrow, even though there are 90 some odd drugs going through clinical trials to cure this. Anyone reading about the blood clotting issues with this virus and all sorts of things we don't know, it's impossible that it happens overnight. If you look at the best possible output for a vaccine that the world has ever done, it was 4 years. I think it was for the polio vaccine, 4 years at scale. Our technology's better, our ability to operate's better, but that's still going to be 1 to 2 years. So we're not going to have that. It's not going to materialize tomorrow at scale. You need to inoculate, 80% of the world. That's billions and billions of doses. That's not going to save us. We don't know. There's so much more about this virus that people are learning every day. That tells me that there's not going to be a cure. Every time you turn around, something looks promising and then it doesn't. I unfortunately had a friend whose cousin died 2 nights ago, 54 years old. He had gotten ritonavir, he had gotten the malaria drug, he had the plasma transfer, he had the antibody transfer, and he still passed away. So there is no panacea cure that is anywhere on the horizon. So assuming that, we're going to have to think hard about what are the scenarios in which things reopen, and how does our industry change and how do we adapt to it? If you look externally a little bit, and we've already seen it, right? We're sitting here on a WebEx, which is quite nice technology for doing this stuff. I have to say I've never used it this way, Jeff. So it obviously does this really well for lots of people because it has the extra stuff. I'm used to using BlueJeans, Zoom. The schools tend to use a lot of Zoom. I don't know if any of you watch the markets, but BlueJeans, which seems to be the lesser known cousin to Zoom, and they're pretty much equivalent in most ways for just basic video conferencing, just got bought by Verizon like 3 days ago, right? So for these companies, it's been just an amazing opportunity, right? To people have been forced to use their stuff. I think if you look at the telecommunications providers, pretty much every one of my friends who has upgraded their internet package to the maximum. Now, I had done that a long time ago because I'm a gearhead and I like it, but everyone has pretty much upgraded their internet package. So the cable providers and the Verizon, Fios seem to be spending money on it because my experience keeps getting better, right? I think that they're now able to invest because more money is flowing, and that money will probably never change because we have all learned our lesson. We need the most at home. Commercial real estate, wow, I don't know. I mean, Manhattan is probably screwed. It's interesting. I was just discussing with a real estate analyst the other day. Is this good or bad for WeWork? Long term. Short term, probably not good for anybody. Long term, who knows? Should I have fixed space anymore if I'm only going to take half my space and just hotel everybody and let half the people work from home? So let me see. Half the people work from home. I just go to a WeWork. I don't have a fixed lease because I'm in WeWork right now. I can just cancel. What is it, 60 days or whatever? It's not my problem. And half my people work from home half the time and they're much happier. That sounds pretty good, except if you own a lot of commercial real estate in Manhattan or a big city. Doesn't sound so good to you, right? So that's going to change dramatically. Who knows how? Hospitality, everyone ask yourself this question. If tomorrow everyone said, go out and do whatever you want, there are no more rules, when's the first time you'd be open to staying in a hotel?
Right. Or getting on an airplane.
Or getting on an airplane or going to a crowded restaurant. I don't know. Like, it's hard. And I think because we haven't faced those questions yet, we don't know the answers ourselves, but it's going to make a difference for our firms and for the people who work for us, right? Because if I'm going to come down to New York City and I don't want to be on the, what's better or worse? Getting on the Metro North every day, using New York City as an example, or staying in a hotel overnight and only doing it twice? What's less risky? What's more risky? I don't think anybody knows yet. So these industries are going to be incredibly challenged, the last two. Technology in lots of ways, if it allows you to do things remotely. For example, DocuSign, MeSign, things that allow you to sign things without being physically there, making a fortune, right? Everybody's signing up for these accounts because work still needs to get done. So when you look at your firm and you look at yourself as a leader, you ask yourself, if this is the normal, if half the time people aren't in the same place, let's just take that as the best example for the next 9 months, maybe, what has to change? And what other infrastructure should I be investing in now for the long term so I'm not scrambling as this continues to happen, because it's not going to turn off tomorrow. We can't forget about airlines. I don't even know what's going to happen there. I think that's a big challenge. And then your local restaurants. Listen, I'm just going to say this because I think it's the right thing to do. Order from your local restaurants, do takeout every few nights, help them out. They're trying. We didn't get to earlier, but the non-knowledge economy, there's been innovation as well. Restaurants are doing takeout. I do it a lot. And you go, you pick it up. They've got the distance. One restaurant, it was the best one. My God, they were so set. They had tables, your name was on it, your receipt was there. There was a pen there. It's a one-use pen. You make the pen, they dip it into, they spray it with Lysol, they put it back into the non-use thing. I mean, they really had it figured out. And there was a line of people standing 6 feet apart with orders. And so they were making it work. So we are an adaptable species. And even the non-knowledge economy does their best to make it work. Telemedicine. My mom just had like a neurologist appointment yesterday over FaceTime, chaperoned by me because it was a little challenging for her to figure it out. But it's amazing how these things can actually work even in the non-knowledge economy. But things will really change. Think about as well, how long can Metro North run what schedule? What's public transport going to be like? One of the reasons the insurance firm that I spoke about decided they're not going to have their people come back as a plan until January 1st, one of the big reasons was, we don't know what mass transit is going to be like. We don't know if they're going to have to cut back. We'd rather leave first responders and essential staff taking mass transit. Let's not make our people join it, right? So this is all going to change pretty rapidly, and we have to start thinking about the halfway scenario for the next year. What happens when it's halftime here, and at any moment we could go back into having to go into lockdown for a period of time.
Yeah, I would agree. And I echo your thoughts too, as far as supporting our local businesses where we can and where it's safe. And again, having kids, a number of which are in that hospitality, restaurant and bar business, they're out of work right now. And so I know so many people in those industries are being hurt. My personal hope is that when things get safe and we can get back out there, we'll eat a little bit more, drink a little bit more, tip a lot more. Because for those of us, again, even with high unemployment, the majority of us, vast majority, are still working and spending a lot less. And hopefully when we can get back out, we can really make up for lost time and help some of the people that were always there for us in those days. But
yeah, and I hope so as well. And if you have anybody who works on your house or does your lawn and they're not working right now, pay them anyway if you can. They really need it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Mike, let's go fast forward a little bit here. We've got about 10 minutes left in the scheduled time, and I do want to get into the live Q&A session. I know that we talked about a couple things, and we're going to go through, we'll skip on the difficult messages, but just some key takeaways. We talked about a number of things. You know, yes, it's different, but it's similar. We talked about that. We've been through crises before. The foundational issues are different, but there's still a crisis for us to navigate and go through. To me, part of it, we talk about riding the wave, it's really trying to get ahead of change. Change is inevitable. As leaders, we need to embrace that and adapt it. Again, being a Jersey Shore guy, I love the ocean. And when you're surfing or riding a wave, you want to get ahead of that wave and you can have a really nice ride. If you let it get ahead of you, it'll crush you. And at the end of the day, change in business is the same way. We want to get ahead of that wave. We want to ride it and be leaders in that where it makes the most sense. But before we move on to the next, which I know it goes back quite a bit of time, any thoughts on some other takeaways before we jump into our questions?
I would go back to this is not your last crisis. Learn from it. Once the fear subsides, that utter fear in the pit of your stomach, which I think for most has subsided now because we realize that there's gas at the gas stations and we can go food shopping and our families are safe, thank God. For those of us, we're not out of the ability to sort of do what we do every day. Now you have to get on the front foot. Now you have to take this as an opportunity. As horrible as this is in many ways, there is always opportunity in crisis. There may be some things that you could never get done before, but now you can get them done and move your firm forward or your team forward because of the crisis, because all of the sort of A lot of the red tape at a lot of places has been gone. I work with another firm, which happens to be World Quant Predictive firm, which was also started by Igor. And sometimes it's hard as a vendor to get through the vendor approval process, right? It can take 6 months. But right now, they're like, if you can predict our supply chain disruption, there is no vendor approval process. We'll sign it tomorrow, right? So there is opportunity in crisis to change things for the better. Once the fear subsides and you put the fear never really goes away, but you can put it to a dull roar and then focus on the opportunity. How are we better after this in all the ways that we can possibly do? And I think that's the critical thing as leaders, is to look past the fear, help everyone else get past the fear, and then try to become better because of it. And look at the lessons and make sure these lessons are not lost, because it won't be your last rodeo. And before we take questions, you want to just go to the last step. So this one, for those of you who can see it, a friend of mine posted this on social media. This is an article from 1918 or 19, so about 102 years ago, about a protest for San Francisco telling everyone outside they have to wear masks during the Spanish flu, I think, was back then. So humanity has been here before in exactly this way. We won't even go back to the bubonic plague, which knocked out a third of the world. But 102 years ago, we were having protests over people having to wear masks when they went out. We heal from this. This is actually pretty normal. We just don't have anyone alive who's remembered this far back. This is normal. It may seem crazy to us, given our world and our lives, but we always recover from this. So take heart in that.
Yes, I completely agree. It's amazing how some things just don't change over time, because humanity is still humanity. One quick poll, Mike. We talked about this as we've talked about leadership, throughout the session here. I want to launch this one last poll before we go into the questions, and that is, I'd like everybody to think about their best job they've had, and think about how their leadership, their manager directly impacted that. Would you say that your manager was the main reason that it was the best job? Did the manager have some impact, or do you find that it had nothing to do? The fact that you loved that job had nothing to do with who your direct manager was. Think about that for a second. We'll let this sit up here for, again, a few seconds. And there's some interesting statistics that go behind this. But what was, when your best job, when you think about that, how much did your manager play a role in that being the best job? Just a couple seconds, and we'll shut this one down as well. And then we'll move to questions. Okay, great. So I'm going to close it down right now. So 40, 56, and 4, 44, 52. Okay, so 44% of you said that the reason your job was so good was because of your manager. They almost half of you said direct impact on why it was the best job. 52% said they had some impact, maybe not the exclusive reason, but some impact. Only 4% of you said that your manager had no impact on the fact that it was your best job. And I put that out there. Thank you everyone for participating in that. I put that out there because the last statistic I saw said that when people leave a job voluntarily, over 70% quit their boss. They don't quit their job. And one of the things that we wanted to drive home today was the fact that now is a time, crisis forges leaders. This is what creates some of the best leaders. Good leaders, people want to work for them. They want to follow them. So if you're in that position, either formally or informally, take advantage, because now is the time to hone in on those skills and be that person that others want to be a part of and work with you. So Mike, we've got a number of questions coming in. And again, we've got about 5 or so minutes that we'll stay on. We'll try to close the audio portion right at noon Eastern time here to be sensitive to the scheduled time. If there are more questions, we'll close out the phone lines, but we'll stick around to answer the questions online as they're coming in. So again, use that questions tab, ask questions directly of Mike or of both of us, and we'll go through some of those. First of all, Lisa had a comment. I apologize. Is it possible to see both speakers, Jeff and Mike? I think people that actually use a mobile phone to connect in using the GoToWebinar platform may only see one photo or one video. If that's the case, I apologize, because you're probably looking at me. Mike's definitely the better looking of the two of us, so that's unfortunate, and I apologize for that.
By the
Well,
way,
let's,
sometimes you can swipe for different gallery views. It depends on the platform. I haven't used this one, but in Zoom you can swipe to gallery view. So look at some of the options on there.
yes. So a couple of comments here. Looks like we're hitting some notes, Mike. Here's one question from Frederick, and it's how much does in-person communication affect relationships, and how much do relationships affect productivity? Can you maintain a high level of productivity if the relationships start to degrade? That's a pretty deep question. Mike, what are your thoughts? And I have a couple of thoughts as well.
So I think the initial assumption was there are a bunch of things in business, let's just talk about business side of it, that require in-person communication to maintain the relationship and keep things well-oiled and do business. So I was speaking with the head of a large PR firm the other day, and we were talking, and she said, I would have never, if you had asked me a month ago if I could strike new business without taking new clients out to dinner, meeting them, shaking their hand, looking them in their eye, and making them know we're real and we're here to help, I would have told you you're crazy. It has to be in person. And in the last 2 weeks, we brought on 4 more clients just over video conferencing. So I would have bet anything about it. I thought I knew my business, but it's just different now. So I think that, and you hear this, and this is never taken off from a terminology perspective, but people are calling this social distancing. It's really physical distancing, okay? Doesn't have to be social distancing. I sit here every night and I interact with my friends over Zoom. We have happy hour, cocktail hour over Zoom. Everyone brings their own cocktail, obviously. Sometimes we start a little too early in the day, I would say, but it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. But you can maintain relationships this way. Obviously, in person is always has a little extra something. But I think given the situation, we're going to find that it's the physical distancing that we have to do, not the social distancing. And we have a set of tools that we're all on right now that we never had back in 1919 or during the polio epidemic or anything like that. So it has, I think we thought as a culture that it had a lot more value than it does. It probably does have some value being person to person, but I think we're all learning it's a lot less premium than we thought it was.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny, last week, Frederick, it's a great question. Last week we had the live session on enhancing remote communication skills. And Michael Peltz and I were on, and we were talking about the different dimensions of connection, where you've got text or email flatline, you've got telephone calls, or as Mike referred back to the 80s, and then you've got video calls and then in person. And we talked about how it may be a challenge with video. And afterwards, I had a great comment from Suzanne Zantop, who's actually going to be our speaker in 2 weeks, or our guest. And she said, and she's an expert in this area, she said, if you train yourself, you really can use video as effectively as you can in person. And I thought about what she said, and I realized, that there's a really good point there. So yes, you're absolutely right that relationships impact productivity. Again, this is a transition, it's a shift. And as we learn to embrace that shift and hone in on those skills so that we can better read people and connect with them, I think that productivity can remain. So that's a great question. Thanks.
Jeff, I got a quick question over text from Laura Krupp, who said her daughter came in and looked and said, is Mike in a bathroom? I just wanted to answer the question. No, I'm not in a bathroom.
Okay, good. That's a good one. And she couldn't type that so we could all see. That would have been great. So, hey, here's a great one from Ginny for both of us, Mike. Personally, for each of you, what are one or two of the greatest takeaways you'll have growing from this pandemic?
I would say my 2 biggest takeaways are, if I didn't know it already, I now know it, that the once in a lifetime black swan event is actually a gray swan. It's once every 10 years. Stop being surprised and be prepared for it. And I'm completely convinced of that now, seeing 3, and I'm sure there will be more. And 2, humanity can be knocked on its collective arses pretty quickly, but we rally very quickly. And the politics and all the rest of that, and the commentary and what have you. But if you look at where we are now versus 4 weeks ago, it's as different as where we were 10 weeks ago when it was normal, right? We have figured out in a lot of ways how to sort of handle this, and get it back to some semblance of normal. There's a big part of the economy, unfortunately, where they have to go to work, where they haven't, but people innovate, and there's nothing like innovation, sort of, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of innovation, or however that saying goes.
Right.
When we have to, we can be pretty amazing. And it constantly impresses me that we really can. But that first couple of weeks is shockingly scary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Ginny, from my standpoint, I think there's a couple, but just in the interest of time, the one thing is what I just alluded to. My background is such that from whether it's doing training or sales or different leadership roles, is that face-to-face. You know, I also teach on DISC personality assessments, and if you're familiar with that DISC concept, I tend to score very high in the I area, which is that social, outgoing, those attributes. So for me to come away from this, to recognize that in this new environment, yeah, we may have to use technology more than I'm most comfortable with. I'd rather shake someone's hand and be in front of them and see their eyes more, and to recognize, okay, I can do some of that. It's going to be different, but I can still embrace the use of a different way to make those connections, because I really do believe how important connections are. For me, one of the takeaways is we can adapt, we can adjust, as Mike said. So that's a good question. Hope that helps. Mike, it's a few minutes past our time, but I think the questions are still coming in. It looks like people are not dropping off. So are you okay if we go a few minutes?
I've got a couple more minutes, yeah.
Okay, so those of you that have to drop off, again, I'm cognizant when we schedule a time, feel free to drop, but just a couple more we'll go through. So here's one from Mike coming in, a different Mike. Are there industries that are not going to be changed by the current crisis? What are your thoughts on that, Mike? What do you think is going to be almost status quo or not at all?
I can't really think of an industry that won't be changed in some way. Now the question is change long-term, short-term, medium-term. Give you another anecdote. Think about this. Who are who's winning right now? Huge. Other than the technology that we're on, getting new subscribers left and right, getting bought. I'll give you one. Car insurance companies making a fortune. Why? Nobody's driving, no claims. Has anyone gotten a car insurance discount yet? Actually, I think one firm is actually giving out discounts, honestly, but they're making a fortune, right? Securities trading firms, never seen this much volatility in a decade, making a fortune. Like, there are always winners and losers. So if you sit there and say, are all firms or business models going to be impacted? I'd say almost absolutely yes, in one way. I mean, McDonald's delivered to my mom yesterday. Who would ever order McDonald's to be delivered? It's a different story, but she's old school, so she likes the McDonald's. But I think there were going to be winners and losers, but I can't come up with one that at least short to medium term isn't going to be broadly impacted. I mean, everyone's impacted in some way, shape, or form, and there will be some big winners. There are going to be some big winners, and there are going to be some big losers. And that's what happens when we have these distortion events.
Yep, I would agree with that. Let's take one or two quick ones here. Here's one from Cassini, and that is, why do you think so many leaders fail to make the transition from a leader to a crisis leader? It's a great question. And, it's been said that anybody can lead when times are good, but no one can take the helm of the ship when the seas are rough. But what do you think? Why do so many people fail to make that transition, Mike?
Good question. As always, Cassina has good questions. Hope you're doing well, Cassina. My best take on it is it requires a level of fortitude that you don't always need in good times. It requires being able to say, having the courage to say things that may not be positive all the time, and to tell the truth. I mean, I won't get into politics here, but if you see what Governor Cuomo's doing, and he's not my favorite person in the world most of the time, but if you see how well he's handling this because he's just telling the naked truth and taking the criticism that comes with it, I think the biggest challenge is you need to be willing to take criticism that you weren't used to taking before to lead effectively in a crisis, and you have to be willing to be wrong because you're working on lack of enough information, and be able to pivot. And if you said something today, this is what we're going to do, and you get some information tonight, you need to be willing to say you're wrong and change tomorrow and take the criticism. And that's the biggest thing that some people can't make the transition to, because a lot of people don't like criticism.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that 100%. We are just about 5 minutes past the hour, so we will go ahead and close out. Again, we're going to stay online to answer questions via text. If you have questions, continue to type them in, and we'll be on for a few answering those. Mike, if you need to cut, totally understand. Before we do that, though, on screen, everyone is taking a look at what we have left in the free webinar series. We actually added one on May 7th about reputation management. Don't let a virus infect your reputation. And reputation management ties into leadership with this. But Mike, before we close out and shut down our videos and the phone lines, any final comments or parting thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, and thank you, Jeff. This was fantastic. Good to get online, see how this all works. And thank you everyone for joining as well on the questions. I would just leave it at this. Humanity's seen this before. This will pass. We will get to a new normal. In some ways it'll be better, in some ways it'll be worse. Just keep that in mind, keep the perspective that these things pass and we do transition, and there'll be a lot of challenges during the transition, but keep the fear at a minimum, right? I think we've seen that, the humanity, society hasn't devolved into the caveman world again. So keep the perspective, right? It's going to pass.
Agreed. And anybody that has the good fortune of working in an organization that you're a leader of is privileged, because I've seen your leadership skills firsthand, and I appreciate that as well on a personal note. So thank you for joining us. The audience, again, thank you for joining us in this series. We'll continue on over the next couple of weeks. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how we can provide custom training for your organization. Reach out to us. And at this point, we will shut down our cameras and the phone lines, but we will stay on to answer some of these questions via text. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Mike, thanks again.
All. Thank you, Jeff.
At this point, it looks like we've got just about all the questions answered. So thank you again, everyone. We will close the session. Please feel free to join us next week and in the upcoming webinars. Take care and have a great day. Goodbye.